Thanks.
Okay, I think we're pretty stable in numbers, so let's get going. Welcome, everybody. This is part 2 of the BGA FRTOL course this year. Tonight, the presentation is going to be by Chula. I'll sort the breakout groups, and Andrew will take questions. So if you've got any questions, please put those on the chat to Andrew. Coaches probably know this by now. Please put a star in front of your name, otherwise you won't end up leading a breakout group. That's about it. Andrew, have I got anything else I need to say? Chula, we all set?
Nothing from me extra, thank you.
Okay.
No, all good here, thanks.
All right.
Do send the questions to Andrew, because I can't talk and read.
All right. I'm going to mute everybody. Chula, you're going to have to unmute yourself, okay?
Okay. Right, good evening from me. And as Paul said, part 2. That's a picture of on the ride back to Dunstable in EB28. And I'm just struggling to make it go forward a slide. There we are. So tonight we're going to review the initial and full messages. I think there are only 5 formats in all. We do recommend that you commit these to memory. Secondly, understand the rhythm or flow once you've made the initial contact with the controller. What happens next? And of course, if you're ready for that, then of course you're going to be more fluent. Thirdly, know what to read back, and it's not good practice to just read back everything to save you having to learn what to read back. And also then to understand the types of controller and what they offer. So let's get going. Initial message. I hope you're all immediately thinking, oh yes, I know that. What comes in here? And that's what you should be thinking of. Their call sign, your call sign, and your request. It really is that simple. Question that often comes up is, how do I know the air traffic control or the ground station call sign? So here are a few ideas on here, and at this point I'll just remind you that all the slides are in a PDF on Paul's website, so you can get them there if you haven't already. And a simple idea is to listen in first. And that's good because obviously you'll hear what other people are calling the station. The station replies back with their name or their call sign. It also tunes you into things like the Q&H, the controller's voice and their cadence. So it's a good idea if you've got the time to listen in first for all those reasons. You can look in flight guides. There's a couple of examples there. If you really want to look at all the detail of an aerodrome, then you could Google NATS AIS, Electronic Aeronautical Information Package. If you do that, and you see all sorts of fascinating details about the airfield, including the ground, the call signs and so forth. And it's part 2 aerodromes. But more practically, I'm going to say look at the frequency card. And for those of you who remember, they used to sell the maps. The CAA used to sell the maps with a frequency card included. Now you need to download it. But if you Google that, then very quickly it will come up. And this is what it looks like, or that's a snapshot of the frequency card. I'm going to refer to this frequency card and show you how to use it in a little more detail a little later in the presentation. So how do you know what to call them on the ground? There are a number of ideas. Frequency card, listen in first, would be the go-to answers that I would recommend. We'll come back to this card. So here's the initial message format once again.
Hello, Chula.
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you. Would I be able to record this session, please?
I think it is being recorded, and I'm getting, unless Paul corrects me now, that will be made available to you. But it is being recorded, and I don't mind if you switch on record from my point of view. Okay,
it's just I had to request for recording access to this lesson. Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay.
The session is being recorded. It'll be posted on the website, so you don't need to.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, so initial message. Now we focused a moment ago on the ground station call sign. I just want to focus a moment on the request part of this format. So the request can be anything sensible, of course, anything you like. So here are some examples. You might request to enter the zone or enter an ATZ to thermal. You might say request join, which means that you want to land at that airfield. It might be a zone transit, a MATS penetration. By the way, 3 and 4 we're going to focus on next week. Or what we were doing last week, and a typical good idea to just focus on for the moment, because it will be the most common thing that you'll be thinking about when you use this, is to request a type of service. And in the context of a glider, that's, I safely can say, will be the service that you will request. Okay. So here is a scenario. It's Little Rissington, which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, I hope, towards Upper Hayford. Arrow helps you out. It's an out and return for the non-glider pilots amongst us. That means you take off at Little Rissington, you soar using thermals, you turn overhead Upper Hayford, and you go back to where you took off from, an out and return. The glider call sign is there. The ground station is listed as Oxford Approach. The position is what you make of it as per the little glider symbol. And the level you can choose. And there's a Q&H. So what I'm going to ask you to do now, sorry, because I just need to move something on my screen, is write out your initial message. I accidentally went forward one more. Never mind. So I'd suggest it will be really basic and straightforward to many of you, but probably not absolutely everybody. So on a piece of paper, the discipline would be just write it out.
Ursula, sorry, would you mind going through that previous slide again?
Sure. Yes, sorry, that's a very reasonable request. Sorry, I didn't think about that. Say if you want me to talk to it, but I think you need me to, because I think it's all on there. So.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. Sorry. Okay, so hopefully you've got something written down in front of you, and hopefully it's exactly that. And for those who think, oh, crikey, this is terribly slow, I apologise. But it is, as I said, I kind of know, having taught this enough to know it's kind of worth doing. So, simple as that. Oxford Approach, Glider Golf, Delta, Echo, Echo, Juliet, request basic service. Okay.
I'm confused by the Oxford Approach. I thought we were going via Enstone.
Yeah, okay. So on this slide here, I was saying call Oxford Approach. So you could call different people. So, but it's fine. If your initial message said Enstone Radio, Glider Golf, Echo, Echo, Juliet. Well, okay. As it's a basic service, the only people who are going to give you a basic service in this context, I know this is not perfectly true, but it's near enough true, are Oxford. So if you want a basic service, you could go to Bryce. They probably, well, whether they will or won't give it to you, they may or may not. The example I was offering you was to call Oxford Approach as the station that you wanted a basic service from. Fair questions. So that's what I was expecting, because you're not going to get a basic service out of Enstone.
Can I ask something here at all? When you ask for, do you always try to go to the closest actual ATC, or would you go to one that's appropriate or a big enough air station to do?
So I appreciate the question, because it's a fair question. What we can't really do is, if we turn this into Q&A, it will fall apart with 100 people. So can you save that for the coach? If you can restrict the questions, the gentleman who came in and said, I need to see the basic information, that's fair enough, because that was silly for me to move on. But we just can't handle all the questions.
Fine,
Either write them to Andrew, I know you get it, either write them to Andrew or save them for the coach. Please.
Okay, thank you.
I'll also just take this point to point everyone to the FAQs, which are brilliant. They come up from all the questions that have been asked in previous years. Again, they're on Paul's site. Okay, let's move on. So again, when I'm teaching this, what happened to in the old days of an actual classroom, what happens was people got out the basic message and you could see everyone relax. Great, done. Wrong. Once you press the button and you start this dialogue, other things are going to happen. So don't start the dialogue until you've thought about what they're going to say back and what you're going to say, and so on. Hence the rhythm, or what I've called the standard sequence. So you as the pilot are going to make your initial message. The default answer you're going to get back is your call sign, their call sign, but the key words are pass your message. That is your cue to deliver your full message, which is coming up in a moment. Air traffic control will then deliver you some response, attending to your request and perhaps other information. And you need to be ready for that, anticipate it, probably, helpful if you do, and give your readbacks. So having this page in mind will serve you. Remember, the slides are on the site. So let's say you did say Oxford Approach, Glider Golf Delta Echo Echo Juliet, request basic service. They're going to say Glider Golf Delta Echo Echo Juliet, Oxford Approach, pass your message. Write out your full message. If you know the format, great, you can do it straight away. If you don't, then the learning is you need to know it. Nigel, just to let you know, you're on my screen, so I'm watching you. As when your head comes up, I know you've finished, and I'll take my timing from you, sir. Okay, so that's the kind of the blank. The Q is the QNH, so that tells you that was your level. Level, by the way, is a generic term to cover height, altitude, and flight level. And on your piece of paper, this is what I reckon you should have. The height, the QNH, I'm not sure if I've got that right, if I matched it up correctly or not, but hopefully you've got the elements there. Got to move on for time. So controller's typical response will be a QNH, the service type. So if you've asked for a basic service, then hopefully you get a basic service back. Any clearances, permissions, restrictions, any requests or questions that they may have for you. Really, it can't be exhaustive, but in the simplest case, it will be QNH 1010 basic service, some such thing. They might say report leaving the frequency, they might say report north of beam or some such. So you have to listen. You need to read back the required elements. That's to say those things that CAT 413 says that you must read back, and you must finish with your call sign. So if you're responding to the ground station, your call sign goes at the end. I'll say that again. If you're responding to a ground station, the call sign goes at the end. If you're starting a conversation, it goes at the beginning. But in this case, it's a response. Now, there's a full list in CAT 413. This, is it a mnemonic, an acronym? It's probably an acronym. Anyway, CRAS is a way of reminding you, teaching and reminding us really the things that need to be read back. So anything that's a clearance. So if you were taxiing on a runway, to cross a runway or taxiing a taxiway, then that's a clearance. If you had a clearance to enter a zone, transit a zone or penetrate a zone, it's a clearance, it has to be read back. If there's a reference to a runway, cross runway 12 at taxiway Delta, it's a runway, it has to be read back. If you're cleared to a level, an altitude, or you're given an altimeter setting, QNH 1010, for instance, or if it's less than 1,000, 998 hectopascals, needs to go on the end. If it's less than 1,000, it has to be read back. Service type, basic service, deconfliction, procedural service, radar control, all such need to be read back, the service type, very important. And any squawk, so if you're given a transponder code, squawk 7020, you have to read back the squawk. So you need to learn that list and remember to read back. Again, it's on the slides. Couple of common mistakes. One is to overuse the ground station call sign. So it's a bit like if I said, Nigel, blah, 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 Nigel. If you keep saying Cambridge approach, Cambridge approach, Cambridge approach, then you drive them nuts. With one obscure exception, this is a hard and fast rule. The only time you ever say their name is on the first call. Cambridge approach, Glider Golf Delta, Echo Echo Juliet, request basic service. You never say the ground station name again. And another one is reading back more than you need to. So I don't know all the things I need to read back. So I'll tell you what, I'll read back everything. Well, it takes up time and bandwidth and wears you out. There's more to read back than you need to. CAT 413 only lists a few things. They're on that mnemonic CRAS. And a bit like I said last week, there's good reason for that, apart from just unnecessary talk. And here's a good reason coming up. So imagine this situation here. They've got a glider going west to east. It's somewhere near Western on the Green. That's just a mental picture to have in your head. So if the controller says, Glider Sierra Hotel, report east of Western on the Green, if you listen to airband, the airband frequencies, you will hear this back, frankly, more often than not. In other words, a complete readback, report east of Western on the Green, Glider Sierra Hotel. That's wrong, because a request to report somewhere, crossing the center line, east of Western on the Green, is not on that list. So why does that matter? Why am I making a deal of it? Because, say, Jet Pilot doesn't hear the report, because maybe you clipped your transmission, you started talking before you pressed, maybe the Jet Pilot wasn't listening properly, maybe there's a bit of interference, but they only hear east of Western on the Green, Glider Sierra Hotel. Then that pilot is liable to make the corresponding assumption, which is that you are east of Western on the Green. And then this is the sort of thing that can happen, and that's called a bad thing. So the right thing to do is Wilco. So if you have a report east of, or report wherever, then the correct response is Wilco, followed by your call sign. Okay, going to move on. Oh, I wish I could talk to you, and I wish I could take all the questions, but I just can't. So thank you for your patience and listening. I'm going to move on now to the types of control. Controls in inverted commas, because it's not strictly speaking, but it will hopefully do for our purposes. You could say that there are three types: full air traffic control, professional controllers, highly qualified people, sit in a control tower, you could say. Aerodrome Flight Information Service, also professional qualified people. Next level, for those present, if you'll allow me to say down. and air-ground operators, the first tier, or may I say bottom tier. To use radio well, you need to have an understanding of these tiers, their call signs, and the type of responsibilities that they have. So you have a controller, a FISO, Flight Information Service Officer, or an operator. An air traffic control then controls aerodrome traffic zones, Class D zone, controlled airspace like Luton zone, Bryce zone, and MATS, a military aerodrome traffic zone. They could also be, I'm not sure if control is the right verb, but if you speak to London Information on 124.6, then they're probably a FISO actually. They could, I withdraw that correction. The controllers could be operating in Class G, depends on the controller. They will have call signs such as Tower, Birmingham Tower, Birmingham Approach, or Radar, or Benson Zone. Okay, if you hear those sorts of suffixes, then it's aerodrome traffic zone. They can issue clearances, they can give instructions, and provide services. E.g. radar, well, it says basic service, but all other services too. So it's aerodrome traffic, air traffic controllers. Aerodrome Flight Information Service then, their area of responsibility is the airfield up to 10 nautical miles, and particularly the aerodrome traffic zone. Now, I hope this is right. Coventry, when I made the slide, was an AFIS controlled by a FISO, and their call sign is information, so Coventry Information. Okay, that's their call sign. They can give information, of course, and potentially a basic service. And by the way, they can issue instructions on the ground, so taxi instructions, for example. So information. Airground. So this is the airfield, again up to 10 nautical miles. Shobden radio, for example, and they can give information and advice. For those true experts out there, I know this is a very, very slight, there are very, very slight exceptions. This is overwhelmingly the simple truth. So information and advice only for airground, and it's the place name followed by radio. So there's the three types. I said I'd come back to this card. So let's look at Birmingham. I've got various things in the way of my screen, forgive me, ladies and gents, I just move things around. So if you look at Birmingham, it says under the column it says radar approach. So now I don't know on 123.980 whether it is Birmingham radar or Birmingham approach. No one is going to die over a ditch or be worried too much if they are radar or approach. But you know it's air traffic control, and you can safely say Birmingham radar and carry on with your message. There is also a tower there, so Birmingham Tower. But your first point of call almost certainly is going to be the radar frequency. Let's look at Blackbush, the next one down. So you see there's nothing under radar approach or tower, but there is a frequency under AFIS. So I'm rhetorically going to say to you, what is the call sign if there is an AFIS at work at, or working, if that's the service you've got at Blackbush? The answer is Blackbush information. You'll see there that there's also airground. And you'll see also it's the same frequency. So it will depend on the qualification of the person on the other end of the radio. If the person is not qualified as a FISO, then it will be Blackbush radio. Yes, it is impossible to know when you're in flight whether they are one or the other. So if you call them, they will correct it when they come straight back to you. So they will say something like Glider Golf, Echo Echo Juliet, Blackbush radio, pass your message, then you know it's an airground. and you know they can't give instructions. And you remember, well, if you're in the air, neither of them can give instructions. Bodmin, on the other hand, doesn't have air traffic control, doesn't have AFIS, only has an air ground frequency, so you know their call sign is Bodmin radio. So that's how this card can help you. Okay, pause, breathe, because I'm about to move on to the last chunk. So when you're calling air ground stations, it is slightly less formal and slightly, you could say, less onerous. Frankly, in many ways, it's easier to call air traffic control because you'll do an initial message, they'll say pass the message, you'll do your full message, they'll give you some information. But it somehow feels less intimidating to call air ground stations. So I suggest it says it on the screen, but I suggest this is what you do. For your request, if you're passing them and not intending to land, I suggest that you say request airfield information. So Instone radio, glider golf, delta echo Juliet, request airfield information. Expect them to give their runway and QNH and any traffic. Okay, so they might say runway 26, QNH 1002, 1 in, meaning 1 in the circuit. You need to read back as appropriate, so you should know there's only 2 of those 3 things that need to be read back. And then I suggest you pass what I've called pertinent information, where you are in 3 dimensions, so position and level intentions. That will work as a general rule for actually air ground and AFIS. AFIS, you could do it for the initial and full message, or you could do it like this. So we've practiced the initial and full messages. We've dealt with what needs to be read back, encouraged not to read back too much. We've looked at the different types of controller, their responsibilities and their suffix, and you know from that card how to work out whether it's air traffic control, whether it's FISO, call sign information, or whether it's air ground, call sign, radio. And we've mentioned there briefly how to start the conversation with an air ground information, an air ground station rather. So such as Instone radio or Bodmin radio. And my tip there is make your initial message, their call sign, your call sign, request airfield information. So that's the input for the week. Next week, this is what's coming up. I may be in error about the types of control service. Maybe we're going over that again. Not quite sure, but it's definitely about zones, transponders, and more. And we're going to take questions. We'll take questions in just a second. Andrew's kindly going to go through those. You're probably overloaded with them. I beg your pardon. Happy to help, Andrew. Just to say that this is the slide for the group work. 3 scenarios, all based on that same flight. One is your high, and you're just calling for situational awareness. Secondly, you're talking about landing at Enstone, and thirdly, you're going to use the kind of example that we went through in the input there. You're going to call Oxford approach for a basic service because look, you're crossing their fan lines north of the airfield. Okay, great. Thank you all very much. Andrew, what does it look like?
Yes, Chula, lots of questions. I'll see how many I can answer, and obviously you jump in if I get it wrong, and a couple of them I'm going to throw open to everybody because there is a lot of expertise on this call. Okay, quickly and from the top. John Fawkes says something that came up when doing the pre-reading, if you're soaring or thermaling and then switch on your engine, so kind of become powered, is that something a controller would care about? James, my experience is unless you have noise cancelling headset in your cockpit, the main problem is going to be you're not going to be able to use the radio whilst the engine's running. So I would suggest you call the controller if you have time before you start up to say, I'm going to be off channel, or even formally leave the channel before you start the engine. Because if they try to call you and get no reply, they're going to start getting worried. Maybe you're organised than me, maybe you do carry a noise cancelling headset with you. Moving on. Nige Murray asks, what is the scope of NAT's field info? So the resource that Chula was referring to is a thing called the AIS, the Aeronautical Information Service, and every country has one under ICAO agreements. The URL has recently changed. It's nats.aero/AIS. If you go there, you can find the so-called AIP, Aeronautical Information Publication, and it's basically got everything you need to know about regulations and facilities at airports, airspace boundaries, basically everything related to licensed airfields. So it won't list farm strips, and basically the only thing it'll say about gliding sites is that they exist and what height they winch to. But it is a useful resource if you want to find out about any licensed airfields. Moving on. Mark Millard says, regardless of the service requested or airfield type, do you always need to start with the full call? Well, Mark, you start with the initial call, which would be something like Cambridge Approach, Glider Golf Charlie, Hotel Sierra Kilo, request basic service. And then you go on to the full call as your second call. But yes, unless it's something exceptional like a Mayday, which we'll come to later, you always start with that pattern. Steve Tarry asks, can an AFIS give basic service or just airport information?
Basic service.
Basic service.
It definitely can.
Give.
I know people sometimes say they can't. I know it's not true because I've flown through Sidewell.
Yep. And I agree with you, Chula. Moving on, James Smart asks, glider Golf Delta Echo Echo Juliet or just glider Delta Echo Echo Juliet? My understanding is that your initial call should be glider Golf Delta Echo Echo Juliet, but then if your call sign is abbreviated, it's abbreviated to glider Echo Juliet. And incidentally, that's one thing that has changed since I did my FRTOL 20 years ago. Moving on, Dave Pye asks about south abeam. Is south abeam a valid positional statement? Yeah, you'd need to include your range as well to be as helpful as possible to the controller, David. So if you'd say something like, 4 miles south abeam, Oxford, that would be a useful position that you could give to a controller. And when you say south abeam, Oxford, we're almost certainly talking about the airfield, not the town. Tim Liscombe asks, is disused airfield required or just good practice? Tim, I don't think there's any particular rules here. It's probably just helpful if there might be, a village with a name and the airfield with a name. If you wanted to be ultimately precise, you would perhaps say it's XYZ disused airfield, but there's no hard and fast rule. This is very much down to you. Gary Newbrook asks one that stumped me, and I'm going to throw open to any controllers on the call. So here's your piece of CAP 413 trivia for the evening, folks. CAP 413, page 14, in a footnote, it makes reference to a call sign of, quote, type C. I've just looked, it is there. This is the only place that CAP 413 refers to type C. What is a type C call sign? Anybody got any offers? Please feel free to unmute yourself and let us know. I'll leave you thinking about that one, folks, and I'll move on. You can come in at the end if you have an answer.
I'm going to guess from the context, and I'm a complete newbie to this, that's an airliner's flight number call sign.
Yeah, and from the context, it looks like it's something like that. But if anybody actually knows for certain, please let us know. Let's move on. Theo mentions that as we've just discussed, the format of calls is a bit different from Mayday. We will come back to Maydays and PAN calls in a couple of weeks' time. So just park that one for now. So Jack Deeth says, quotes, Wilco Glider Sierra Hotel, and he queries whether it should be call sign first when just saying Roger or Wilco. Jack, the iron rule is if you are initiating the little sub-conversation with the controller, you start with your call sign and then you pass whatever the content of the message is. But if you're replying, and Wilco implies that you are responding to something the controller's asked you to do, you're saying you will comply with what they ask you to do, it would be Wilco followed by your call sign. Wilco, Glider, Sierra Hotel. If you found a place in Cat 413 where that doesn't seem to apply, please point it out. We'll pass it on to the CAA because it's a bug. Almost there. Christopher Sanders says, why have I heard people use call sign traffic on YouTube? Christopher, this relates to what the CAA calls unattended airfields. So if you're flying into a little strip that has no controller at all, so Rufford, for instance, near Bury St Edmunds would be an example, you make your call to other traffic in the circuit, a so-called broadcast call. So, and you should, in my view, also do this at gliding sites if you're going to comply with Cat 413. So you should make your, for instance, downwind call as Granston Lodge traffic, Glider, Sierra Hotel, left downwind, runway 22, Granston Lodge, for instance. So that's when you use the call sign traffic, when you're talking to other traffic, not when you're talking to a controller. Peter Fairmont says, from the current version of the frequency reference card, it looks like Shobden now has an AFIS as opposed to ground. Okay, Peter, take your word for it. I think that may well have changed, and they do update the frequency card from time to time. Duncan Bray, how do you know if a FISO can provide a basic service? You know what service they can provide from the call sign. If their call sign is information, then they can provide a basic service. If their call sign is radio, then they can't. So even if a FISO is sitting at a desk providing a radio, an air-to-ground service, they have to comply with the air-to-ground rules, even though they're qualified to give a different kind of service. And will all MATS controllers use a call sign of zone, asks Terry Hatton. My experience is that the British military ones will, and our American cousins will call themselves, for instance, at Lakenheath, will typically call themselves Lakenheath Approach, even though they have radar. As Chula said, don't sweat it. And as Paul mentioned, you could even just leave the zone approach or radar off the end of their call sign on your initial call, and they'll put you right as to what they want to be called in subsequent calls. Alistair Nunn mentioned that Sky Demon also provides frequency reference. That's good, and you can also get it off the map as well. We're almost there. Paul Knight says Blackbush is AFIS unless NOTAM does air to ground.
Okay.
And we're almost there. We're almost there. Paul Knight. Andrew, one other thing, if I may. Most aerodromes are now PPR when booking in status, AFIS, or air to ground will be advised. Yes, fair point. If you are actually planning to fly into a particular airfield and you have to, and it's a privately owned airfield, and you have to get prior permission, that's what prior permission required is all about, then they'll tell you when you phone them or email them what their service is. If you're dropping in, making a essentially as an alternative to a field landing, if you're landing in your glider because you can't find anywhere else to land and the lift has stopped, then you're going to have to work this out over the air. Nigel Betteridge, why would you ask Gemstone Radio for airfield information? Why not simply a basic service? Because they can't provide a basic service, Nigel, and we'll perhaps expand on that. If you go back and look at the online lectures, you should see that that's explained. Gemstone Radio can only provide information about their airfield and a little bit of information about the traffic around it. And Merlin Ota, how come ATC control is possible in uncontrolled Class G airspace? Great question, Merlin. The short answer is it isn't. If a controller talking to you in Class G gives you something that sounds like an instruction, it is actually a request unless you have previously agreed with them that you would, for instance, try to remain above a particular level for deconfliction. But unless you have previously agreed to follow their instructions, they cannot give you instructions when you're in Class G airspace.
Yeah, that's quite an important thing. If you've made a contract with them to do what they say, then you should do what they say. But they can't order you to do it in uncontrolled airspace.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in there and say we can give you an instruction to remain outside an ATZ in Class G airspace.
Oh yeah, that's entirely
But
reasonable.
that's true. Thanks, Sophie. Yes,
Nice point,
ATZs
Sophie.
are technically Class G airspace, but we do, you can be instructed to remain outside an ATZ. But for the rest of Class G, obviously everybody's doing the best they can to cooperate. But if you're in a glider and somebody tells you to do something as a controller and you're in Class G outside an ATZ, then you can politely decline.
I think that one is worth just exploring a little more, because if an air traffic controller asks you to do something, there's probably a reason behind it. So sometimes the right answer is, I'm unable to do that, because you're unable to do it. But sometimes, and the example is I go past Marham quite often, and they fly very expensive fast jets out. And if they've got a bunch of fast jets getting airborne, they'll ask you to stay outside the mats. It doesn't seem unreasonable to me to comply with that request.
Yeah,
and I will. So,
as we say, the reason we're doing this is to improve cooperation and help assist in everybody's safety. But I think we've covered that point adequately now.
Okay, I have if you're done, Andrew, I have a couple of questions that came my way.
Oh dear, I'm not sure I am. I'll crack through the last 2 or 3 as quickly as I can.
Okay.
Chris Puxley has an answer on Type C, and I think we're just going to email it to people.
Good answer.
David Pye has an answer on Type C. We'll email it to people. And George, gosh, you've all been doing your homework. Thank you, folks. And James Reeves, thank you. We'll put together a composite answer and mail it out.
It's on the chat, actually, because there's somebody's gone to everyone on the chat, so that's okay.
Okay, good. Jamie Stokes asks, we always state QNH, but are there instances near an airfield where we would use QFE for height? Yes, Jamie, we'll talk about that when we talk about landing at airfields. I think we've got lots of people about Type C. Thank you, everybody. I'm scrolling through them. There are lots of them.
Or why don't you take over with yours while Andrew gets?
Yeah, we're done. I think we've covered everything that has come up, and Andrew's just got the last one that I was going to raise. So
Okay.
Okay, I think we're going to move on because we are. I think we'll call it a day there on questions, Andrew.
Okay.